hotspot? The wireless is dragging a
Can
bit.
you hear me?
It's still dragging. Still dragging.
Okay.
I'm using a hotspot.
Okay. Yeah.
We're just going to start now. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us at this webinar session. It's been a very rainy day, so we're anticipating some glitches in network, but we hope that we're still going to have a very fruitful and nice webinar session. My name is Adetayo, and I'll be your host this afternoon. Regulatory compliance is an integral part of corporate governance, and that's why this webinar is being hosted today on the platform of the Society for Corporate Governance Nigeria. It's part of our efforts in the development of corporate governance in Nigeria. The Society for Corporate Governance Nigeria is a not-for-profit organization that is dedicated to the development and expansion of knowledge on corporate governance in Nigeria. We have a membership platform of individuals and corporates who share our values and are equally committed to our objectives, and we jointly contribute our efforts in pushing the message of corporate governance. We do this through trainings, seminars, and a webinar in this situation, the one you're in today. We do advisory support, we consult, and we do advocacy for good corporate governance in Nigerian organizations. A fast-changing business and regulatory environment indicates that for effective regulatory compliance, organizations have to be swift in changing their business processes to align with the fast-changing environment, or else they run the risk of sanctions, litigations, reduced stakeholder confidence, amongst other things. And so for effective integration of GRC today, we see that it has become necessary that organizations have to not just be able to change their business processes as fast as the environment is changing, but they also have to be able to foretell the changes that will happen. You have to be able to predict it so that you have adequate systems in place to align your business processes with these changes. And that is why we're here today. We're here to explore the changing dynamics of regulatory compliance in the business environment, and to discuss how we can put in place systems for ensuring effective regulatory compliance. Mrs. Hilda Inco, the Chief Executive Officer of the Society, would immediately after this introduction session be introducing the speakers and the subtopics of discussion for these seminars. We will be taking questions immediately after the discussion. So if you have any questions, our participants, please send them in through the question and answer chat window. You can do that whilst the discussion is ongoing, or immediately we start the question and answer session. Please make sure that your questions are sent in through the question and answer box, as there's a very high chance that we might miss them if they're sent in through the chat box, because a lot of comments will also be coming in. If you have any other comments or inquiries or require any form of assistance, please just digitally raise your hands or send in your comments through the chat box. A member of the team will respond to you immediately. Thank you again for joining us this afternoon. Please sit back, relax, remove all distractions, prepare your minds to learn or learn and relearn, and prepare yourselves for an enlightening webinar session. I'll see you again after the discussions. Thank you. I'm afraid Mrs. Hilda Enko is not. I'm sure this is just a network-ish, but I'm just going to do the introductions on her behalf, or I'm going to start while she gets back here. So today we have four very, okay, she's back here, so she'll take over now to introduce the speakers. Thank you. Mrs. Enko, we're waiting for you, ma. Can you hear me, ma?
Hello, everybody. Well, here they are. I hope everybody can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Can you all hear me?
Now. Yes, we can hear you now.
Yes. Can you all hear me?
We can hear you.
Can you all hear me? Please just wave your hands.
We can hear you.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to take over for her again. So we have four very lovely speakers. You can see them here today. And I'll be taking them in order of their discussion. So we have Mr. Alhassan Sidi Sulaiman from the Security and Exchange Commission. He is going to be speaking to us today and is going to be taking the first session. He's the head of Department, Financial Standard and Corporate Governance of the Securities and Exchange Commission, Nigeria. Immediately after him will be Mr. Godtime Iwenekai. Mr. Godtime Iwenekai is the head of Listings and Regulation Department of the Nigerian Stock Exchange. Thereafter, we are going to have Ms. Ngozi Ijemanze, who is a manager, financial policy and regulation at the Central Bank of Nigeria. And the last but not the least will be Mrs. Tomi Adepoju, who is a partner and the head of internal audit and risk and compliance services at KPMG Lagos. So we're going to have Mr. Alhassan Sidi Sulaiman take over now.
Okay.
We're ready for you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. And good afternoon, everybody, the panelists and the participants who are hearing us. It is my pleasure to be part of these webinar discussions. As you rightly said, I work with Securities and Exchange Commission. And my work for today is to just look at the regulatory requirement for public companies and how effective that we are managing the compliance as far as the laid down rules and regulation and other laws pertaining to the activities in the Nigerian capital market. Well said. The issue is that we as a Securities and Exchange Commission, our main concern is to ensure that an average investment and average investor in the Nigerian capital market is fully protected. And to do that, we can only come up with rules and regulations to ensure that public companies and other key players in the market are fully compliant with those activities. And to do that, we can only ensure that we have a better monitoring within the context of the capital market activities. And with the current situation in the country or in the world in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic, we cannot just say we cannot hold up our hand and just think that the only way that we can ensure compliance is that if there will be physical activities. And to do that, we have to internally make sure that we activated all our business continuity activities before we can just say that let's just get back to the market to ensure that they are fully compliant with the provision of their business continuity plan. And that's the reason why that the management of the Securities and Exchange Commission ensure that all the staff of the commission work remotely, even within the period of the lockdown. And when the lockdown was eased, then it was directed that all the head of departments need to be in the office, but all other staff will now be working remotely. And that's what we have been doing to ensure that we have not left any vacuum for the purpose of enforcing all the necessary regulatory activities and to ensure compliance by all the regulated entities. And this issue of COVID-19, it has served as a wake-up call for both the regulators and the regulated entities. And in doing that, the SEC decided that to issue a lot of guidance to the regulated entities. Some of those guidance that were issued were through some circulars that were done, and we're able to have a lot of synergies between us and other regulated entities, in particular Nigerian Stock Exchange and other key players in the market. Because when we saw that things are trying to get out of hand in terms of the pandemic, then we have to leverage a lot of other technological incentives, not only even within the commission, but even from other regulators or SROs, which is the sub-regulatory organization like the Nigerian Stock Exchange, to the extent that we started discussing how we can leverage the ex-issuer portal for the purpose of submission, analysis, and review of financial reports. And as requested as part of the details that is required of me, that few of the requirements that are expected from public companies by the Securities and Exchange Commission, and to ensure monitoring of their activities and to ensure compliance with the laid down rules and regulations are submission of their audited financial statements at the end of each of their financial year, and then submission of unaudited financial statement on quarterly basis to the Commission, and submission of annual report on compliance with Code of Corporate Governance as issued by SEC, which is now going to be replaced with Nigerian, with the National Code. And to do that, we equally came up with the guidelines for the specific entities within the Nigerian capital market, of which is subject to the agreement approval of the Financial Reporting Council. We are currently talking, and we have gone far on that. So few of the directives that were issued within the period by the SEC to the regulated entities were that filing of all applications to be done remotely, and we make sure that we activated all our electronic means of submitting these reports. And equally, we ensure that all fresh applications in terms of registration and other activities have to be submitted through those dedicated email addresses rather than to wait. Previously, the only thing that we can accept that in terms of forms and other evidences, it has to be physical. But when we look at this, we activated all our electronic emails, and then they are submitting most of the registration requirements to those dedicated emails. And at the same time, the SEC looking at the challenges that are faced by most of the audit firms in terms of auditing financial statement of most of the public companies, we decided to give an extension of 60 days period for them to be able to conclude, meaning for those that have a year end of 31st December, of which they are supposed to submit their audited financial statement on 31st of March, we give them a moratorium of 60 days grace, of which that they have that period to submit up to 31st of May. And now looking at the prevalence of the pandemic, we are still looking at the possibility of giving additional extension, of which the management of the commission is now giving consideration to that. And all this is just to ensure that it's a hitch-free compliance period, so that nobody can just say that because of A, B, C, D, that's the reason why that we cannot comply. Our reason is that we can never leave a vacuum in terms of compliance with the provisions of rules and regulations as issued by the Commission, because the major issue of concern to the regulators is to ensure that whatever rule that we have issued, that entities are complying with it to the fullest. And we cannot just say because there is a pandemic and then one or two things, infractions may be made, and then punitive action will not be taken against the recalcitrant operators. So, but we as the regulators too, we have to do what is required of us before we can say that we are going to punish anybody. So in doing that, at the same time, we ensure that we schedule most of our meetings, and some of them it is just like the capital market committee meetings, just to give an opportunity for other people to make preparation, and for those who are up the office, that at least they may have a better opportunity to prepare when the schedule of the rescheduling of the meeting is available. And at the same time, in conjunction with the Corporate Affairs Commission, the Prime Minister of Finance, the Prime Minister of Trade and Investment, the Nigerian Stock Exchange, and other key players in the market, we decided that, look, most of these institutions, they are supposed to conduct their annual general meetings. And they, based on the guidance issued by the Nigerian Center for Disease Control and Federal Ministry of Health, the issue of coming together of a large number is no longer tenable. Then what will be the way out? And it was to that extent that this group of stakeholders decided that let the Corporate Affairs Commission issue a guidelines on how that AGMs can be conducted through proxies. And that's what we have been doing. And even our representative of the regulators, we used to join them electronically. And we gave a guidance that the number should not be more than 20 or to a maximum of 25. And then all other stakeholders should be given an opportunity that they can join the meeting electronically where possible. And even us as regulators, we are joining most of the meetings electronically. The reason for us to join electronically is for us to observe certain issues so that we can be able to give a full protection of investor at any given time that the need arises. And on doing that, most of the issues that we observed, we used to compare it with the provisions of the audit report, whether that whatever that we observe is in tandem with whatever that has been disclosed by an average auditor. Recently, we received a lot of call from the Association of Stockbrokers issuing house, corporate houses of Nigeria, ASHO, that with what they have seen, some of the auditors are still battling to be able to conclude most of the audit reports. And reason being that like states like Ogun, Lagos, and Abuja, some of the offices are still not yet fully open, and some of them they cannot access their office, and they can only access their office for them to be able to do a good audit work. So we are still giving a concentration to that, and where possible, we then expand up minimum period that will be able to issue a guidance to that effect. And we are expecting that full compliance to that will come up or hopefully within the next 2-3 days. And we should know that because of the current change of leadership in the commission, we are still expecting that we are expecting a new leader to report. So some of the issues we have to allow the new leadership to take over, but that notwithstanding, there will, as I earlier said, that there will never be a vacuum in terms of enforcing the laid down rules and regulation and ensuring compliance by all the regulated entities. And in addition to that, we look at the issue of debt issuance, whereby that you find out that some of the issuers have already gone far in terms of making preparation for payment of principal plus interest. But unfortunately, because of the current situation, some of them may have to reschedule. So on that note, we decided to give a guidance to the issuers that whatever adjustment that they are going to do, it has to be in tandem and then with approval and discussion with the trustees. And the trustees will be able to get back to the commission to get further clearance. And that's the reason why all our electronic platforms have been open 24/7, so that nobody can just say that he could not get back to the commission for him to get certain clearance or approval. So, and it gives us an opportunity to improve on our technological infrastructure, because before the pandemic, we are not even much leveraging on the technology that we have made an investment within the commission. And likewise, that's what we observe even with other regulated entities. Even though we know it will be costly for most of the regulated entities to come up with certain regulatory technological infrastructure, but that notwithstanding, with the current pandemic, it forced them that they have to find a way of doing one or two things that make them to be more active. And we're always in constant discussion with them. And most of their issues have already been taken care of. And in addition to that, we issued a guidance that all regulated entities, they have to submit their business continuity plan to the commission. And on every 2 weeks, they have to submit an update on how they are complying with their business continuity plan. And equally, they have to put that update on their website to ensure that the investors and the other shareholders of those institutions and other stakeholders are able to be informed of what is going on within their own institutions. So on that one, that's the level that we have so far gone. And that notwithstanding, our issues are coming. We are always adjusting to ensure that we have not allowed certain things that will bring down the market to a certain extent. And let me also give a credence to Nigerian Stock Exchange, of which they are giving us very, very much support and the cooperation in terms of ensuring that we are doing the best that we can to ensure compliance within this pandemic period. So on that note, let me just stop here, and then let me see how far that it will go before we can go for further discussion. And if there are any other questions or clarification that may be required from me within this period of time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Suleiman. We'll now have Mr. Godstime Iwenekai from the Nigerian Stock Exchange. The floor is yours, Mr. Iwenekai. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hilda. And thank you, my co-panelists and everyone that is participating in the webinar this afternoon. My name again is Godstime Iwenekai. I work for the Nigerian Stock Exchange. I'm asked to speak to us this afternoon what we are doing at the exchange under the COVID situation that we find ourselves. And I have a subtopic that said changing dynamics of regulatory compliance. And I want to divide that into two. by speaking on regulatory reforms during COVID-19 pandemic and recent regulatory compliance issues in Nigeria that will still interest participants going forward, even post COVID-19. Now, what are the things we have done at the exchange in conjunction with other regulators, especially own apex regulator of the capital market, the Securities and Exchange Commission? Some of the things we did include waiver of certain rules of the exchange. There we also issue and support the implementation of new guidelines that governs meetings, whether they are board meetings or general meetings of companies. And we also approved what we call regulatory palliative measures to assist companies that are listed on the exchange. So those are the things I want to quickly discuss. Number one of such things that we did is the issues around rendition of financial statements. What we did was to issue a circular granting 60 days extension for the filing of financial statements to the exchange, both audited and periodic, that is quarterly financial statement. So for companies that has December year end, for example, whose audited were due to be filed with us by end of March, we extended it to end of May to file those financial. That is a 60 days extension. And we did same for those with March year end, and the quarterly returns that we also due within those periods. We also granted extension for companies to file those financials. And we put out a statement out there to the public to understand why this delay, because at the time we all know that the country was on a lockdown and people were not able to move, and people were not able to get information to prepare those financials and file them with regulators as when due. Another thing we did was to work with the Corporate Affairs Commission, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and other government regulators to come out with certain guidance that companies could adopt to have their meetings by their annual general meetings and even EGMs by proxies. And so far, since this started at the stock exchange, we have been working with the companies and the CSC to ensure that this meetings happens and that they are rancor-free. Indeed, I just rushed from one of such meetings which I attended physically to get to be a part of this webinar, which is the AGM of NEM Insurance PLC. And it went well with the support that the exchange is giving to the companies to come up with how best to arrange those meetings without issues. I think one could have imagined how it would have been without such guidance from regulators to ensure that companies are able to meet, to approve auditors, constitute audit committee, pay dividend, and so many other things that our laws only allowed to be done via annual general meetings. On corporate meetings, including board meetings, the stock exchange also issued guidance on virtual board meeting, committee, management meetings, any form of meeting you want to have as a corporate. We issue guidance that we think could help both listed and non-listed companies to organize meetings in a seamless way without issues. Then we waived the enforcement of Rule 20.8 of the exchange. And that is the rule on general mandate, related party rules. Now, I'll just give a little background on that rule. It was a rule, is a rule that requires companies to go to their AGM to get an approval for general mandate to do certain related party transaction. Now, you recall that when the CSCs first issued the guidance for AGM by proxies, they limit matters to be considered at those meetings to only ordinary businesses. But we will discover that this kind of approval that companies are supposed to get at an AGM is a matter that is a special business in line with CAMA, so it's not an ordinary business. Now, to help companies to go around that challenge of only discussing ordinary business at those AGM, we decided to waive the enforcement of that rule, but subject to certain conditions which we published some time back, such as the company will obtain the board's approval before entering into such transaction, and they must also publish the approval within 24 hours of obtaining it, and they will disclose the matters that they got approval for in their quarterly returns that they will file with the exchange. But thankfully, the CAC, after further engagement with stakeholders in the market, decided to allow certain special businesses to be considered at those AGM by proxies, provided the company obtained the CAC's approval prior to the meeting. Another thing we did to support the market is that you record that when you file your audited financials with regulators, in line with ICANN's requirements, the external auditor's opinion is required to carry the auditor's ICANN seal and stamp. But at a point, we got some feedback from some listed companies that because the auditors were not able to move to get to the offices to get stamp and seal, they are not able to file those accounts. We worked with the ICANN secretariat, and the ICANN issued a statement at the time the market was on a lockdown to say auditors are allowed to issue their opinion without their seal and stamp, provided after the lifting of the lockdown, they will affix those stamp and seal and resubmit to the regulators. Then we also work with the SEC, as my colleague Alassane has already, Mr. Alassane has already explained, to ensure that companies make material disclosures to investors on the impact of the pandemic on their business operations. And affected listed companies have been disclosing the impact of COVID-19 on their businesses, and they are keeping investors well informed on how they are managing the pandemic and every other thing that they are doing. That is that on some of the things that we have done in conjunction with working with the market. Now, how has the exchange been carrying out its operation throughout this period? Since the middle of March till now, key staff of the exchange, all the staff of the exchange, apart from those that are in charge of managing the facility and all that, have been working from home. Before this time, we have a robust business continuity plan, disaster recovery plans to ensure that if anything happens and we are not able to access the exchange, we can work from home. Our intermediaries, that is the dealing members of the exchange, without coming to the floor of the exchange, they can also trade remotely from their homes and from their offices. And since we started the implementation of this business continuity plan, we have been working from home seamlessly. It's for us, it's like business as usual. Anything we can do in the office, we are doing it from home. We are attending the meetings we're supposed to attend to give some sort of support to minority investors that we are watching what is going on in their meetings and all that. And in terms of those coming to access capital in the market, we are reviewing those applications and we are giving approvals as and when due. In summary, our operations are not hindered in any way by the pandemic because we are able to work from home and do every and anything we are supposed to do as a market regulator. And that is the extent of what our investment in technology in the market is helping us to do at this time. I'm going to wrap up by going into recent regulatory compliance issues in Nigeria that we expect all participants to pay attention to. And these are issues around the corporate governance sustainability, and data governance. Under corporate governance, you'll recall that the Financial Reporting Council of Nigeria issued the Nigeria Code of Corporate Governance, SCGN 2018, January last year. At the moment it was issued, it becomes effective. The reporting on it will be after financial years ending after 1st January 2020. So it is expected that every participant in the market, especially those that are required to comply with that code or to apply that code, begin to plan towards reporting on it. The another issue I want to highlight is the issue around sustainability. The Nigerian Stock Exchange issued its sustainability disclosure guidelines last year as well. And this requires companies to have in place policies to address sustainability issues. Indeed, it is mandatory for companies on the premium board of the exchange to report on, to do sustainability reporting. Every other company on the exchange is expected to do sustainability reporting, but it's not mandatory for them for now, apart from companies that are on the premium board. Then the other issue I want to draw the attention of participants to, especially this era of COVID and post-COVID, is issues around data governance. You recall that the National Information Technology Development Agency, NIDA, issued the Nigeria Data Protection Regulation in 2019. There are a lot of things that are expected of companies to implement in line with those regulations. I'll just quickly touch on those three areas I want to discuss within the limited time that I have, and if there are questions, then we'll take them from them. The Nccg code has a philosophy of apply and explain. So either you apply and explain why you did not apply or how you are applying the code. And it is applicable to all public companies, whether listed or not listed. All private companies that are holding companies of public companies or other regulated entities. Then concessioned or privatized companies are also required to apply this code. Then regulated private companies. If you're a regulated company, you are also required to apply the code. And what are the key highlights of the Nccg 2018? Every company is required to have a whistleblowing mechanism, and they are to establish a code of conduct and business ethics to guide how employees operate. Annual board and corporate governance evaluation will now become a thing that is very important to company. There should be independent directors that should not possess shareholding in excess of 0.01% of the company's paid up capital or any material value that can affect their independence. The MD CEO should not transit to the role of chairman of the board without a 3-year cool-off period. And the companies are also required to disclose the remuneration policy as well as the remuneration of all directors in their company's annual reports. Use of alternative dispute resolution to settle dispute with stakeholders so as to protect the reputation of companies is also encouraged. Companies are also required to have robust succession planning. They are to develop a robust stakeholder communication policy and to have an investors portal on the company's website where relevant information will be published. In terms of the exchange sustainability reporting requirement, companies are to ensure that the sustainability report contains information relevant and meaningful to stakeholders. And the guidance provided in internationally acceptable standards. An example is the Global Reporting Initiative Standard. And multinationals that choose to adopt reporting format of their parent company should ensure that the reports fully address their Nigerian operations. Then the timeline for this reporting is 9 months after the relevant year end. So if you're at December year end, we expect that you should do your sustainability reporting or not before end of September the following year. Then let's quickly move to some of the highlights of the Nigeria Data Protection Regulation, which we think participants in this program should pay attention to. Note that the regulation applies to Nigerians residing in or outside the country. All public and private organizations in Nigeria are required to make available to the public their data protection policies. The objective of the regulation is to ensure that data privacy, prevent manipulation of personal data, and ensure safe exchange of personal data. Now, a data controller, according to the regulation, is anybody that processes data for more than 2,000 data subjects, and such person is required to conduct an annual audit on his data policy. And the need there is also to license data protection compliance organization, that is DPCO, who are to carry out this audit, train and consult with respect to compliance with the NDPR. And neither will only accept data privacy audits from such licensed DPCOs. For data processing to be lawful, the data subject must have given consent, or it is the interest of the data subject or the general public. And the data subject has the right to object to the processing of its information for the purpose of marketing. Now, there's a penalty for this. Penalty for breach of the NDPR could result in a fine between 1% to 2% of the annual gross revenue of the data controller. Now, I would like to conclude in the next 2-3 minutes by looking at the future of regulation, especially with what we have seen with COVID. We believe going forward, there will be high level of reliance on the use of technology for regulation. In other words, what we call RegTech. More attention will be paid to that in regulating entities. And there will also be introduction of self-regulation. There will be opportunity for companies to self-regulate and report to the regulators. For example, for listed companies, issues around free float, insider dealings and all that, the exchange will encourage companies that are listed on this platform to self-regulate and carry the exchange along. Then we'll also look at collaborative regulation. That is aligning regulation nationally and internationally by engaging a broader set of players across the ecosystem. This is what we believe will be the future of regulation going forward. I want to thank you so much for listening at this point while I wait for questions that will come for further discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Iwenekai, for your presentation. And I'd like to please just tell all participants that our speakers, our panelists have slides to share, but because of time, they're speaking through their slides. Our next speaker is going to be giving us the central bank perspective of this discussion. She may share her slides if it's possible, or she may choose to just speak through her slides, but we will send the slides to as many as have indicated at the end of this program. So please, Ms. Njemanze, the floor is yours if you can hear me.
Mr. Njemanze, can you hear us, please? We're waiting for you. We apologize for that. We're experiencing some network glitches today because of the weather. I think we're just going to let Mrs. Adepoju take on while we sort the network issues that Mr. Njemanze is having. Mrs. Adepoju, please, can you start your session?
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. I would just like to share my slide. It's disabled. Okay. It's currently disabled, so maybe I'll just talk through my slides. So I've been asked to speak on implementing structures.
I'm sorry, you can share now, Ma. It's enabled now, Ma.
All right.
Okay.
Can you see it now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Yeah, so I've been asked to speak on implementing structures and processes for effective governance and compliance in our current regulatory environment, all within the topic that we are considering. And for me, I think the first thing is actually saying, why is regulatory compliance so important to us? We've seen situations in the last couple of years in Nigeria that the regulatory compliance risk is becoming higher and higher. We did a survey of senior leadership, audit committee chairmen, risk committee chairs, CEOs, CFOs, chief risk officers, chief compliance officers, towards the end of 2019, with the results published in March this year. And of the top 10 business risks that the respondents, about 108 respondents in total, everybody voted that regulatory risk is the highest risk that businesses operating in Nigeria are facing. And this cuts across various industries. And if I look at the result of past surveys that we've also carried out over the last couple of years, the last one was in 2018. Regulatory risk was number 3 at that point in time. It means from 2018 to date, it has moved to become the most significant risk for businesses operating in Nigeria. I mean, notwithstanding COVID-19 issues. And you may want to ask yourself, why is this the case? Both listed companies and unlisted companies are saying complying with regulation is a major issue for us. And we did ask questions, why is this so? And a number of responses were provided to us. One is the fact that in Nigeria, and I'm sure it happens in other places as well, but also here, we seem to have multiplicity of regulations. In fact, a lot of people believe we are over-regulated in some sectors, and it's not giving the operators breathing space to actually be able to grow their businesses. The other things people mentioned is that the penalties are so high sometimes. If a company maybe does something wrong, sometimes the penalties are so high that you almost wonder whether are we trying to kill this company? Yes, they made a mistake, but how do we also work with them to remedy it? And we've seen that example over the last couple of years with billions of dollars in terms of penalty. And this has also become a major concern even for the shareholders and the investors in the businesses. They also have issues relating to rapid changes in the regulatory landscape. A lot of regulations come out at different points in time. I've just tried to list out some by the side of the screen. Between January 2019 and now, these are just some, very few of the regulations that have been issued by various regulators for which companies need to actually comply with. The Finance Act 2020 is major in itself. A lot of them warrant organizations having to change and tweak their processes, change their systems to be able to accommodate and comply with these codes or with these regulations. And when you need to do all of this, some of these things take time. They need education, and people are concerned that sometimes these are not really put in place before these regulations are actually issued. We have the Nigerian Code of Corporate Governance that reporting needs to start from this year for some organizations, and the breadth is actually quite wide. There is the NISA that some of my colleagues have mentioned, quite a number of them, and the concern then is the cost of compliance is rising and it's becoming quite high. How can this really be addressed? And we ensure that, yes, you run a business, you are able to comply. Everybody wants to be a compliant organization, but then the cost of compliance is managed adequately. so these issues are being faced by operators as we speak. And we then began to ask ourselves, what is the role of a regulator? If we're going to be talking about effective processes that need to be put in place to ensure that we have an effective regulatory compliance environment, we need to start with the regulator and then move on to the operator. So what is the role of the regulator? Regulator is extremely important. The regulation plays an important role in our societies. Regulations are used to control risk that can lead to societal problems, as well as manage a broad range of risk. And of course, we then have the regulators whose primary responsibility is to oversee the compliance with those regulations and also issue new regulations that are protecting public interest and conducting players within the sector. I've tried to highlight some of the roles of the regulator because this will shape some of our discussion as we go along. I believe the primary role of the regulator is to establish policies that enhance industry growth and development. There cannot be a regulator if there's no industry. And so what is paramount is ensuring that we have regulations that affirm the growth of that industry, ensure that companies are able to develop, become bigger, and widen the industry. So everything we do has to always be referenced to this. The regulator also oversees the activities of the operators in the industry to ensure that people are doing the right things at the right time. Regulators also assist operators to achieve compliance with defined regulations and bylaws. So we bring out various regulations, but we also have a duty to help in educating, providing clarity, and coming up with policies and procedures and guidelines that would enable people to be able to comply with those regulations. And of course, promoting high standards and collaborating with other regulators, because nobody lives alone. There are several regulators within our space. How do we also ensure that each regulator is able to work seamlessly and work well with other regulators such that the burden on the operator is reduced? There is ease of compliance because as you talk to one, you are probably talking to many at the same time. Those for me would be the roles of the regulators. And in fairness, as we look back, a lot of regulators have indeed played this role over time. We've listened to our two panelists already talking to us about what they've had to do during this COVID period, just to ensure that the burden is lifted. Operators are still able to carry out their roles and responsibilities and their businesses without hindrances. We've seen the Finance Act coming up with tax incentives, even for SMEs, to enable them to be able to thrive in this challenging period. We've seen extension of timelines for submission of statutory filings and tax remittances by SEC and even FIRS. I mean, just as Mr. Irubenekai has mentioned, we've also seen situations where there have been moratoriums provided for repayment of loans by CBN. So a number of the regulators have actually come out with several guidelines to help operators, especially in this very challenging time that we are in, which we've all not seen before. Some things have become new normal for us. However, in spite of this, we believe, and the operators do believe, that there's still a lot more that can be done. And so the role I'll try to play today is to try and speak to the regulators from an independent perspective to say, what are those things that are proving challenges to the operators today, and what are the recommendations that we will prefer to enable regulators to also be able to manage those challenges. And from there, we'll also go to the operator. What are those things that operators need to do to ensure that they are on the cutting edge of compliance? Because every organization needs to ensure that you comply with regulations and laws, because you need to manage your brand and your reputation. And so in coming up with this, we had several discussions with a number of operators cutting across various industries, just to try and feel their pulse and understand what is going on. We do this intermittently, and I tried to just match the comments that we've heard, which were all very similar incidentally, even cutting across oil and gas, whether it's ENR, it's banking, it's the manufacturing, FMCG, telco, different operators cutting across all of these industries. And I've tried to merge the pain points to about 4 things as shown on the slide. So as I talk through the recommendations I've provided on this slide, I would also provide some of the pain points that were mentioned as we engaged the operators. So the first one looks at relationship management. And there is a need to enhance relationship management between the regulators and the operators. A number of operators believe that the regulators can be more flexible. Yes, you are the regulator, you do hold the cane. However, there is something called stick and carrot. You can't only hold the stick all of the time. It has to be a give and take. And if they would like a situation where our regulators are more flexible and listen more to the operators, because sometimes they do have reasons why some things were done, or some things are being done, so that when we then look at those reasons or the rationale, it becomes easier to understand what the issues are, and we can help to address these issues. So they would like the regulators to have more frequent stakeholder forums with them, because in talking to them, we are able to understand their challenges, and in understanding their challenges, that influences some of the guidelines that we are bringing up, and also show empathy. Sometimes they just feel nobody is listening to us. These are the issues we are facing. How can we get our regulators to understand this difficult terrain where we are operating? And based on this understanding, we are then able to move forward. Sometimes the pain point comes from the slow turnaround and response time to queries that are being raised by the operator to say, how do we do this? What should we do? What's your understanding of this? And we really don't have responses coming on time. And so the recommendation in this area for the regulator to ensure that we're able to create an effective regulatory compliance environment is to say that our regulators need to enhance their relationship management with the operators. That's some of what could help us to do that. Part of what I've mentioned, frequent forums, frequent seminars, and possibly even having a technical help desk where it's somebody is there permanently. So if people have issues, they have bottlenecks, they can easily come to the regulator to ask questions without the fear of facing any backlash. And they know that they will get responses to their questions. So that's the first one. The second one looks at enhancing regulators' compliance management process. So we come up with regulations. The process with which we utilize in coming up with those regulations can be enhanced. For example, how do we ensure that we are talking more to the regulators, to the operators, to carry them along from the time we start thinking about coming up with the policies or those laws, so that we are able to have both viewpoints. How do we ensure that we are able to automate the regulators' internal processes and procedures, such that we are not spending so much time maybe looking for things, or something has been filed before we find it difficult to file it. If things are automated, then the process becomes almost seamless. And then how do we ensure that we don't start out with giving penalties? Somebody has done something wrong, violated a regulation. Can we start out by engaging, give sufficient time for them, send a warning letter, give sufficient time for them to actually remediate, and where the time has lapsed and remediation hasn't happened, then we can then go ahead and issue sanctions and penalties. However, even the sanctions and penalties need to match the particular regulation that's been broken, so that you are still able to grow the industry. Those are some of the comments that we got while talking to the operators, and our recommendations for those. Part of also ensuring regulators' compliance management process is easing the reporting process. Sometimes several reports are requested for, and some of those reports are actually talking about the same thing. Can we streamline the reports that are needed? can we streamline the reporting process? Regulator A asks me for report A. Regulator B is also asking me for the same report. Is there a way we can create something whereby once I've submitted it, everybody that should need it can actually get a hold of it? I know the FRC is in the process of trying to create something like this, and it's important all regulators and operators put their hands together to ensure this works, because this is what would really streamline the reporting process going forward. The third area is ensuring better harmonization of our regulations. We have too many regulations that are not clear. There are overlaps in regulations. Some of them are ambiguous. We need to find a way to streamline this and pull all of them together, such that if I know I need to comply with a law, once I've done this, I've sorted out every other regulator. That helps to reduce my cost of compliance and also helps to ensure that there's better collaboration amongst the regulators. Today, some of the operators believe that there's contradiction in different regulations, and each regulator holds on to his own interpretation. And because of holding on to that particular interpretation, fines happen, sanctions happen. Meanwhile, there's a similar regulation somewhere else that somebody is trying to comply with. So we may need to find a way to work together to ensure that there is less ambiguity and better interpretation of the regulations. The last one talks about enhancing the process for drafting and issuing new regulations, which I've spoken about. And as we issue these new regulations, can we also, maybe after the first year or so, feel the pulse of the operator to see how this regulation is happening, such that if there are things that we need to then amend, we can quickly do so. There is no law that says that we cannot amend the regulation even after it's been issued. So those were some of the feedback we received from the operators and the recommendation we are preferring to enable regulators also be able to create an effective regulatory compliance structure and environment. Moving on to the operators, there are quite a number of things that also needs to be done to enable our operators get it right when it comes to regulatory compliance. We did a survey 2 years ago, just trying to check what is happening in the regulatory compliance space. And we noticed that there are quite a number of the operators also said that they don't have complete repository of regulations, for example. If you look at, if you pick a particular company and you try to say how many regulations am I expected to comply with, you will almost come up with almost 1,000 laws or regulations, which is quite a lot. And it changes by the day. Local government will come up with its own, state government will come up with their own, regulator comes up with his own. It's just numerous all over the place. And so a lot of people find it difficult to be able to pull together a compendium of regulation to enable them comply with this rule. But even before getting to that, the first thing we would say to enable operators to be more effective in complying with regulations is to say establish a compliance framework. What's our framework for managing compliance within this organization? Have we defined the governance structure? Who within the organization has the bird's eye view that can actually say when it comes to monitoring compliance, this is the go-to person? I know a lot of organizations have the corporate affairs director, but most times when you look at the roles and responsibility of the corporate affairs director, they are actually just doing external stakeholder management. They are not really overseeing the compliance process. Some have started designating that to the chief legal officer, some to the chief compliance officer, but it's important to actually codify who is the focal point of responsibility at the board level, which committee is responsible, at the management level, which function is responsible, and then that cascades down to the whole of the organization. The second thing is to define those roles and responsibilities and get everybody to know about it. Based on that, we then even define the regulatory, come up with the regulatory rule book, which is a compendium of all the relevant laws that we need to work with. Whether from a local government perspective, today you can wake up and somebody can shut your branch just because there's one local government law that has not been complied with. And unfortunately, when you can't even go to the website of the local government to see anything, you have to physically go there to try and collect the notification of all the laws that are applicable that you as an organization needs to be able to comply with. So that exercise has to be done because you must have that rule book developed. When that is done, it's then important to develop the processes that the organization would utilize in managing and complying with those rules. So if you have a rule, which unit within the organization is responsible? Because even if you have a compliance function, they are not the one doing the day-to-day management of the particular law or regulation. There is a unit involved. How do you cascade all the information together such that you are able to monitor the processes you put in place and people are actually complying? From there, you then need to look at how to improve the compliance culture within the organization. We need to do a lot of awareness training sessions, get people to understand what is expected of them, include regulatory compliance as a KPI for people, such that if they do things that are violating those regulations, it actually impacts their performance management. It's only when you do that that people sit up and ensure that they comply. That you need to just find a way to promote compliance culture within the organization. Part of what also needs to be done is to regularly monitor and review the effectiveness of the regulatory risk management controls. The audit function is the third line of defense. Audits need to include an audit of regulatory compliance as part of their plan. They need to go around and actually check that those laws are being complied with and reports sent to management and the board on a regular basis. As an organization, we also need to periodically prepare and present compliance reports to the relevant parties at the executive management level, at the board level. We've engaged a number of board members that feel it's on the pages of newspaper, they get to know that their company has been sanctioned. Management didn't report to them on time. They didn't know on time. So how do we ensure that we've defined the reporting framework? We know the reports that need to go out, the frequency of those reports that should go out, the details within those reports, and the reports are indeed being looked at the right place. Then we also need to increase the awareness of our regulation by scanning the environment. Are there new regulations that are coming out or are proposed by the regulator, even by our legislators, that may impact our organization? How do we get to know of them on time? How do we get to also influence them and give them our own perspective such that when the regulation eventually comes out, it's a win-win and it's not meant to stifle the business environment? That is something that organizations need to look at and do more proactively. Lastly, it's also a need to establish a regulatory stakeholder management plan. What do I mean by that? Who are the people within who are my stakeholders when it comes to regulatory compliance? I need to identify these stakeholders. Part of them will be regulators. Some of them may even be my host community because they can create issues for me. It may be my suppliers that can do something that can create a non-compliance issue for me. So I need to come up, identify my stakeholders that I should manage when it comes to compliance. How do I also analyze these stakeholders and ensure I know the ones I need to manage closely, I need to monitor them, I need to be informed of what is happening in that space. For example, today you may have a regulator, depending on the persona of the head of the regulatory body. The way the regulator behaves may be different. Tomorrow you may have somebody that is more bullish, and then things change. So the same things you used to have, that somebody engages quietly, somebody else may rise up tomorrow and the first thing you're saying is a fine. So how do you keep track of what is happening even within the regulators? Who is coming where? How do we develop a relationship such that things are easier and seamless? And then you also then need to then develop a plan. Can we engage more? I've talked about the regulator needing to engage. Operators also need to engage. You need to go there, have VCs, talk about the industry, talk about what is going on, feel the pulse of the regulator, and then help them. And then once we do all of this, I believe that we would definitely be able to improve our regulatory environment, both from a regulator and an operator perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tommy, for that presentation. And we'll just go straight to CBN. Ngozi, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. I don't know if you hear me.
Yeah, it's dragging a little bit. If you can just put up your slides and let's walk through it.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but it's dragging a little bit.
Basically, I'm just gonna I intend to discuss real.
Because we can't hear you well.
Yeah.
If you can share your slides. A slideshow.
I'm sorry, because of network issues, I'm just going to have Miss Njemanze run through her slides. She's on the phone and she's going to be speaking through my own window. So I'm going to put her on speaker now. So she's going to run through her slides.
Yeah, but please, can we have it on the slideshow, please? It's still slideshow, please.
Okay, while we wait for her. Yes, I can hear you.
Let her just speak.
Hi, Tayo, can you hear me?
Yes, we all can.
Okay. I was trying to share the slides. It wasn't popping up. So if you can still hear me, I can quickly run through it. A lot of what I would have discussed have already been taken by most of the panelists. I would just like to rehash a few things that are going on with the COVID-19 pandemic and its business impact for us in the banking industry. Can you still hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can. I can. Go on.
That's fine. So for us, effective regulation must and should adapt to rapid changes in the industry, particularly for us in the banking and financial system. Increasing complexities in the operations of banks and other financial institutions make it very important for us to have these effective regulation in place. Today, our complexity is the COVID-19 pandemic and its business impact, which I have said and described as being new, rapid, global, and very revolutionary. COVID-19 has a growing impact on the global economy. In addition to the human impact, there is also significant economic and business commercial impact also being felt globally. The Nigerian financial system, of course, not excluded. So the prevalence of new risk events in the banking sector and the shocks they trigger make it imperative that we can create frameworks to manage them effectively. Moving on real quickly, the goal of compliance for us is to provide greater investor and consumer protection or confidence. Trust is an essential pillar of banking, and that banks thrive today solely on the trust reposed on them by individuals, business firms, regulators, and other legal entities. So with the unexpected advent of the COVID-19 pandemic, it has highlighted challenges with respect to how regulated institutions are expected to comply with some regulations issued by respective sector regulators. Therein lies, of course, the basis of corporate governance, and at its heart, the role of the board. Before I go on to just quickly run through some evolving boardroom perspectives, I just want to briefly mention that the business impact for the banking industry that has evolved in the advent of COVID-19 includes a few things, such as the fact that the pandemic has increased the adoption of digital channels, which has put tremendous pressure on technology infrastructure and resources. For governance and risk control, potential changes to board procedures and effectiveness due to travel bans and restrictions are also some of the impact on the banking industry. We have concerns around continuity of processes, which have direct touch points with the customers, but still manually operated in bank branches, who have had to either have some limited service or be shut down during the pandemic. It's also important to know that customer interaction with digital platforms will increase during this period, given that this is the principal option for carrying out transactions. I think interesting for me under this webinar is to discuss evolving boardroom perspectives. Some of them are things that we're going to see evolve, especially on the side of the operators, and even for the regulators, the supervisors, and the auditors. So we have trending risks. Today, for me, the greatest trending risk for us in the financial sector is the cybersecurity risk and regulatory risk. These are new also going to be involved in the board. Today, we know that it probably has the highest possibility.
I'm sorry, we can no longer hear you. Mr. Jamanze, we no longer can hear you. And so we're going to have to skip the rest of this session and go straight into the question and answer session. I'm going to keep trying to connect her. We apologize for that. It's been a rainy day and that has affected network. So we're just going to start the question and answer session. As we said at the beginning of the webinar, if you have any questions, please send them in through the question and answer window. I'm going to take the first question, and this is for Mr. Alassane. Could you unmute your microphone, sir? The COVID-19 challenge is still very much around, and only God knows when the issue will be fully resolved. Hence, the new deadline of May 31 has passed. If this situation persists till the third quarter, what will the SEC do?
Well, as I rightly said, even when I was making my own presentation, we're looking at the issue on case-by-case basis. Even before now, there are so many requests from the market looking at the end of the extension period that we have provided previously, and people are requesting for extension, and it's receiving the consideration of our management by effect. So we are not unmindful of the business operation of most of the companies. And it is not our intention that we are going to overburden them with a lot of penalties for non-compliance with the submissions of this report. So we are trying to do something in that regard, and it is expected that within the period we are going to give additional extension to see how further it will go. But that one will be subject to management consideration, and we are on it. And we are surely going to look at the issues at hand before we can say that we are going to punish or penalize anybody for non-compliance. Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry, the next question is also for you.
No problem.
Is the submission of the business continuity plan required by public companies mandatory or just a recommendation for compliance?
In the interim, it's a recommendation for compliance, but based on the level and then the situation that is coming, and then we realize that in particular the manufacturing sector, most of them are open businesses. So we are still on it. Based on the outcome of the submission that we are receiving most of the institution. But for now, we are getting a lot of compliance, and we're not asking people just because they are thinking that there will be no punishment and then they will relax. To us, we just assume that that could be concealment, that they are not trying to open up to most of their investors and the regulators based on their business activities. So I encourage them that they should make sure that they comply with the directive that has been issued by the Commission on that regard. But we are going to look at it, and at least, if not for anything, we used to give credence to those people who have already submitted and comply with our directives. And that notwithstanding, if they have any other issue, we look at them as the compliant regulated entities. And well, for those who have not complied, we may assume that there was a certain time that we give directive they could not comply. So they may not make necessary suggestion to say that one or two things has happened, and then we'll believe them.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Yeah. The next question I have here is for Mr. Iwenekai, that's the Nigerian Stock Exchange. How has the Nigerian Stock Exchange adapted its supervisory visits program, as it is no longer able to go and visit firms? So I guess the person is asking, what are you doing now that you can no longer physically go and visit organizations? How do you still supervise them?
Okay, thank you very much. Like I mentioned during my presentation, the Nigeria Stock Exchange is leveraging on technology to do most of its supervisory role. Now, the exchange as an SRO, that is a self-regulatory organization, is also a market for listed companies. I'm sure that question relates to what we do to regulate dealing members of the exchange, that is the stockbrokers, using the layman's language. Now, the site visit to those dealing members prior to this time is no longer an issue of visiting all the companies or all the dealing members in a year, but we have adopted what we call a risk-based approach to our supervisory regulatory oversight of dealing members of the exchange. But even at that, this supervisory visit is divided into two. We have what we call the off-site and the on-site visit. So during this period of the pandemic, what we now do is predominantly the off-site review using technology of those daily members of the exchange. Like I said, we also do a risk review of the companies. And if there's anyone that requires a physical visit for anything, which we have not seen at this moment, we schedule that as at when the time allows us to do that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. My next question is for Mr. Alassane. Are there guidelines in Nigeria for the role of institutional shareholders or investors in corporate governance in Nigeria? If yes, which organization, SCC or Nigerian Stock Exchange, is responsible for monitoring institutional shareholders or investors in corporate governance, and how can the guidelines be assessed?
You're on mute, sir.
Yeah, your microphone is muted, sir.
Okay, I've done that. Thank you. I said the issue of monitoring the institutional investors' activities is in compliance with the provisions of our Code of Corporate Governance, and it's likely it's equally in the national code, and it's equally being monitored by the Nigerian Stock Exchange. So I can say that in terms of monitoring the institutional investor or other activities of other investors in any corporate entity in Nigeria, these three organizations are coming together to monitor the activities. So what I'm saying that you should go through the provisions of all the Code of Corporate Governance as issued in Nigeria, and you see all the required positions on that effect. So the SEC, the NSC, and the Financial Reporting Council are in charge of looking at those areas for the purpose of compliance and protection.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Mrs. Adepoju, on the issue of overregulation, is it the case that regulators in Nigeria tend to see their role as controllers of the industry, leading to being heavy-handed, strict compliance approach rather than trying to be collaborative and help grow the industry? Is there a case of tough fighting between regulators which prevents them from adopting an harmonized approach?
Well, I think those are some of the things that the operators mentioned. And I think it really relates more to the character of, the tone is always set at the top. And so the personality of the person at the top determines how the organization actually approaches the market. And so, yes, in the past, we've actually seen a situation where there have been tough fighting. We've seen situations where people feel they are controllers. But we've also seen situations where people have been very collaborative with the operators. There are some, in talking to people, there were some regulators that almost everybody we approached talked about. They liked the way they were collaborative. They liked the way that when you talk to them, they're able to listen, they're able to provide support. So it is possible. And I think what would really help is ensuring there's better education, continuous education of roles and responsibilities, and matching it to the fact that the primary responsibility is really to grow and expand that industry. The regulations must enable that to happen. Where it's not enabling that to happen, then there's a problem. But everybody has a role to play in it.
Okay. We have a question here, which kind of is related to a personal question I also had. So I'm going to ask this first, and then I'm going to add an addendum of my own personal question. So how do you clearly define compliance roles and responsibilities across business units in view of the emerging GRC concept of oneness? And I'm just going to quickly add my own question. So I was just right as we were preparing for this webinar, I was thinking, so for organizations who have the GRC systems integrated, how are they, and they already have softwares for implementing or integrating this system, are they supposed to still have a tick the box compliance thinking, just to comply with whatever sectoral regulator they have, just to comply with the requirements of any sectoral regulator that they have? So I think that's a two-part question for you, Mrs. Adepoju.
Okay, thank you very much. I would start with the first question. I think for the, sorry, remind me again, the first, sorry, remind me of the first question again, that, okay, GRC, yeah. So,
yes.
I would say, first of all, there are different people doing different things within the organization. Let's take the finance function, for example. Finance function are the ones dealing with a SEC and NSC, filing returns and some things like that. But they are not the people actually generating some of those things that they do. The same with company secretariat. So you then need to go back to say, for this particular regulation, at which point in the organization is a unit involved to ensure compliance. So if you take a bank, KYC is a major regulation in the financial services industry. The person that needs to ensure that in booking a new customer to the bank is the customer service point. That's when the new customer comes in to open an account, there are certain things you need to check and validate. If that person does not do that role well, it's already created a problem for everybody. So that role and responsibility must be linked to the roles and responsibility of that particular function and department. And even in doing it, there's an internal control function that should ordinarily also have checked that all of those documents are in place, the documents are accurate, they are comprehensive, before you turn on the switch to onboard the new customer. If that point also fails, then there's a problem. There's also the internal auditor that should come and do a periodic check and provide assurance to management and the board that indeed all of the policies we put in place are working the way it should. So in defining the roles and responsibilities for each regulation, you would have had to go through each of those points to say, what is the regulation? What's the interpretation? What do we need to do to comply? At which point within our system should this happen? What checks are we going to have in place? So if, for example, you need to file returns for withholding tax at specific points in time, they are not going to wait till the 21st day to start checking if it's been done. In working through our process, we would have defined some days earlier than that, such that, and I'm linking it to your second question on system, the system also would have been programmed to ensure that it's able to check compliance with some of those things. So if I need to render returns on the 21st day, I already indicated in my policies and procedures as I'm looking at my regulatory compliance that by the 15th day, somebody should have done something somewhere. And if that person does it, there's a trigger that goes to a supervisor to show that it's been done. You can onboard the documents to actually show that it's been done and the person can see it, and then the process goes seamlessly. If that person doesn't do it, the trigger should go off. That's exception reporting. So you are proactive in actually monitoring compliance. So a lot of organizations today have automated the regulatory rule book that I mentioned, which has already listed all the regulations. You've included the sanctions if you don't comply, so everybody knows the weight. You've also included the responsible party and included timelines for reporting and the people that should be escalated to, the timeline for escalation, whether it's periodic or it's time bound, because some things are annually, some things are based on events. If you've gone through all of that process, it makes compliance easier within the organization.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Ma. My next question is for Mr. Iwenekai. Actually, I have two questions here for you, and I'm just going to merge both questions. You talked about data protection provision requirements for corporate entities. And this person is asking that even though the time frame given for compliance has lapsed due to the pandemic, has there been consideration for grace period for entities to comply? That's one question. Then the second one is, apart from the Nccg code, the Nccg 2018 codes regards institutional investors and corporate governance in Nigeria, are there other regulations or guidelines for this purpose?
Okay, thank you very much for those two questions. The first one on the data protection regulations, I'm not aware that NITD has given any extension for compliance. But I think with what every regulator is doing in Nigeria today, if any of the operators or company approach the regulator, I'm sure they will definitely give some consideration due to the pandemic that the whole world is facing. But right now, I'm not aware that they have issued any statement extending the timeline for compliance. On the issue of protection of guidance for shareholders, whether retail or institutional investors. I will align with what my Oga from the SCC, Mr. Halassan, had said earlier today. The NCCG code is there and is clear on what companies are required to do in the area of stakeholders engagement. The SEC code, as we speak, is still in existence, even though the regulators are working to harmonize all the codes. And the FRC, the SCC, the NSC, even in our rules as well, we have things that guide how companies are expected to relate with their various stakeholders, including shareholders, minority and institutional shareholders. And the CAMA also have provisions for relationship between shareholders and their companies, how they are to monitor what is going on in their companies to ensure that appropriate corporate governance practices are in place and are entrenched in those companies. So I think when you look at the various codes existing before the NCCG, the CAMA and the NSC rule, the guidance, everything that a shareholder need to ensure good corporate governance practices in their companies could be found in those regulations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Mr. Halassan, post the COVID-19 pandemic, will the Security and Exchange Commission be undertaking a thematic review of firms' business continuity plans first to ensure that all these organizations have taken cognizance of lessons learned from the pandemic, and that these plans that they have are robust enough to withstand any future incidences? Your microphone is muted,
yes,
sir. Okay.
I'm already on it. Proactively, that's the reason why that we said, apart from submitting the business continuity plan to the commission, that each and every 2 weeks that they should be submitting an update. And at the end of the day, that if we exited the pandemic period, then eventually we may go around on on-site assessment of what is actually that has been submitted to us, have a better discussion, and if there is a need for us to have a better forum, and then that we can discuss with all the necessary stakeholders. And for those who feel that we are going to do a lot of corrections and then taking certain punitive measures to ensure that compliance is being made, then we are ready to do that. And this is the reason why actually we are always keeping ourselves updated based on the performance of their business continuity plan.
Okay. So the next question is kind of related to what you just, somebody's asking what you are doing to assist companies that are on the exchange to put a robust business continuity plan in place. So if after you've done your review, you see that you don't have a robust business continuity plan, what do you do to help them in this regard?
Well, in that regard, we as regulators, we are coming up with a lot of other ideas. And that may not only be restricted to only us. We may decide to say that we are clearing certain group of consultants who may be involved, and then eventually we are going to assign them to most of the companies to see how further they can be able to assist them, so that at least we can have a robust system whereby that we are going to look at the going concern of that businesses. So we are on that, and it's a continuous development, and we are going to look at it, and we are getting in touch with a lot of stakeholders because we are concerned how the performance of the market will be post the COVID-19. So we are engaging people, and equally within ourselves, we are doing 1 or 2 things to ensure that things are getting better. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. So, Mrs. Adepoju, this is kind of still related. What would you recommend would be the effective mediums for collaboration with the regulators? So how do you think that regulators and operators can have smoother collaborations and relationship? What mediums do you think they should have in place that can be effective?
I think there can be scheduled periodic meeting points, either on an industry-wide level or individual level. So, for example, if you have a stakeholder engagement section where you want to feel the pulse of the regulator or the operators, that's a medium to actually discuss and be able to agree things. It can also be from a company's own schedule perspective. Sometimes you see news, the leadership of X company have gone to pay a courtesy visit to a particular regulator. Those are stakeholder discussions that happen there just to try and feel the pulse. Sometimes it may be that the operators can also assist with awareness. Sometimes it's because people probably can be more trained in some areas or be exposed to other things. Obviously, in some cases, the operators may have more sophisticated systems or things like that. And you can actually exchange ideas. There are some things that, there are awareness sessions that can happen. The regulators can also exchange ideas with peers in other jurisdictions just to learn from one another. What are you doing? What are we doing? And based on the cross-fertilization of ideas, it improves the level of collaboration and engagement within the system.
Okay, I have a further question. With the way things are now, would you recommend that this stakeholder engagement forum is something that should be done on a periodic basis? Should we have set timelines for it? Is it something that every regulator should anticipate to do probably annually or at least once every 2 years, or before they make any major changes, any major regulatory requirements changes? Is this something that you would recommend that should be done on a periodic basis?
I will definitely recommend that. I remember when the Nigerian Code of Corporate Governance was going to be issued, and there were several engagement points with different stakeholders. A lot of people had misgivings or things they wanted to clarify, and those engagement sessions helped to nip it in the bud. I'm sure CBN, SEC, and all of them also have sessions they do periodically, which helps to be able to clarify those things. So maybe the issue is saying how much more often should those sessions happen, so that some of those questions people have, we can actually have an open forum to discuss them, or should we have a point desk that people can actually raise frequently asked questions or raise questions to, because we also know people are busy, so sometimes it's not every time you're able to meet the director or the people you want to engage with. So we just need to find a way to do, it's a combination of approach. It's not just saying because I've done a session once a year, what happens in between that if people need to be able to engage. The impression we also get sometimes is that for some of the regulators, the engagement becomes a problem because it's seen as though you should never come to ask questions. People are afraid to actually ask questions because in asking questions, you can be sanctioned. So all of those behavioral issues are things that need to be dealt with and curbed, such that there is a better relationship between the regulators and the operators.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Mr. Alassane, please, how has the Security Exchange Commission been able to use the regulatory sandbox to facilitate regulatory compliance requirements? And how can other regulatory agencies benefit effectively from this approach?
In trying to do that, for the purpose of capital market benefits, and that's the more reason why that we are always having this capital market committee meetings. And in doing that, each and every time that we receive a complaint, and then we have what we call within the financial industry, Financial Regulatory Service Coordinating Committee, which is being chaired by the CBN governor. At any given time that there are representation from various key players of financial sector and other regulators. And we put things together and ensure that all other sectoral problems are being looked upon, and at a particular time, then if there is the need for us to go back to each other and say that this is the corrective measure that we are supposed to do, or this is the kind of harmonized regulation that we are going to issue, or this is the kind of harmonized bailout that we are going to do. We normally do that, and then I believe that one is moving the financial industry forward. But that notwithstanding, as you all knew, whatever that you are going to do as a regulator, you may not find it easy. Some will look at it as if you are only targeting them. Some will just look at it that you have more better way to do it rather than to say that this is the way that you are going to do it as a regulator. And it is on that basis that we came up with this proposition that for whatever regulation that we are going to come up as a rule, we have to expose it to the market. Let us hear the comment of people. And we now open our doors that for anybody who has that an opportunity to even come, even if it is on one-on-one basis, let him just air his own view. And we are ready to accept that one. And we are getting better. And in particular, Recently, people were calling that we should abolish the issue of shareholders association. But we realized that even though there could be some group of them that may be nuisance, but there are certain group of them that are adding value to what we are doing. So if we receive any complaint or suggestion from them, we still look at it based on its own merit. So all other issues, if it has been presented to the regulators, we first of all look at it based on its own merit, not just because yes, there is a complaint and we have to look at it as a complaint, or else, you know, there will be a lot of things that you may not even do the right thing, rather than you just be looking at so many other outrageous complaints of which you may find out that there are issues of personalities in it. So on that note, we are actually doing a lot to that through the Financial Regulatory Coordination Committee, through the Capital Market Committee, through the interagency relationship, in particular the SROs, like the engagement that we normally have with Nigerian Stock Exchange. The moment that they understand certain things, they send it back to us, and then we look at it based on merit. If it requests approval for them to implement, we do. If it requires that we are going to do implementation jointly, we do. But notwithstanding, we always carry along the stakeholders so that we can be able to have a better compliance with that regards.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir. Yeah. I would like Mr. Iwenekai to answer this question. It's really generic, so it's not specifically for the Nigerian Stock Exchange. Against the background of necessity for virtual general meetings and other corporate governance thrown up by the COVID-19, are the regulators collaborating to ensure that the revised CAMA passed by the National Assembly, which is before the President for assent, is reviewed to ensure that these new issues are taken on board in order to ensure that the new legislation is not outmoded at birth?
Okay, my short answer to that is that both the NSC, the SCC, the CAC, and other primary regulators are working together to ensure that lessons learned from what is going on now as COVID-19, you know, are incorporated into the way business are being regulated in Nigeria going forward. Those talks are already ongoing to the best of my knowledge. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Just before you go, I'd like you to also answer this. What are the regulators doing on our existing performance indicators set as parameters to evaluate the performance of microfinance banks, most importantly during this pandemic?
Okay, I'm thinking that should be for the CBN. Yes, the stock exchange does not have such a parameter set for companies. It's an SRO on the market. So I think for microfinance, that should, if Ngozi is still on the line and we can hear her, I think that should be from the CBN.
Okay, I'm going to see Mr. Jamanze, can you hear us? Can you take that question, please? Her network has been really bad because of the weather. I'm just going to move on to the next question and then we'll send that to her and she can take it later. Mr. Alassane, this is for you, sir. I find that most regulators in Nigeria issue regulations and guidelines and treat non-compliance to both alike, either by their sanction regimes or otherwise. Should these rules not have different approach vis-a-vis non-compliance? Person is talking about guidelines and regulations. Should
the issue of regulation, you know, is part and parcel of humanity. Even from our creation, you know, there has to be rules and regulation, and they have been issued for people to comply. So for anybody to think that there should be any other way of enforcing the rules and regulation, when it has been issued, it is expected that you have to comply, because that's the beauty of operating within a regulated entity. And that's why that you have been called a regulated entity, meaning that whatever that you are going to do is in compliance with the laid down rules and regulations. What we are after, in particular, we in the SEC, is that we must make sure that we protect an interest of an average investor in the capital markets. So to do that, you cannot just say that people will just come and shortchange the investors without taking any punitive measures. And then you have to give a guidance. How are we going to operate our business? What is expected of these regulated entities? How are they going to make sure that the interest and average investor that have given them necessary investment for them to manage, that they have reaped the benefit of that. And you know, if you allow things to just go haywire, you can never get it right. And then the only thing that can happen if you are trying to make a protection is to come up with the guidelines, rules, and ensure enforcement of compliance with those rules and regulations and guidelines. So this is the position, and that's why we are being called regulators. And you cannot just say that because I'm an armed robber, and then a policeman has to come with another way of catching me. It's not just a if I'm shooting, then he should not shoot. He should come with a lighter way of handling me. So I'm sorry to say, if you are operating in the regulated entity or in a regulated environment, then you have to comply fully with all the regulations that are there. There's no two way about it.
Thank you, sir. We're just trying to be Nigerians. Mrs. Adepoju noted that when internal auditors, in carrying out their function, discovered risk events, made recommendations that have been satisfactorily implemented by management, why is it that the regulators still penalize the entity despite the fact that the issue has been satisfactorily remediated?
It's the regulators that need to answer these questions. Mr. Alaska, they say, why are you still penalizing us if you've
I've asked you that question? The regulators will still answer. But why I've asked you, because I understand that you're also a consultant, even though you're also coming from the operator angle. So when you have picked up an issue, and especially in your consulting services, and you have advised the organization to do this, to do that, and they have made amends, and then you find out later that the regulator still sanctions them or penalizes them, how do you handle it as the consultant? And then the regulators can now answer why they still penalize them.
Well, there's actually nothing for me to handle as a consultant, because remember, a consultant only provides recommendation. The organization is the one that has the responsibility to implement that recommendation. Yeah. So if it's been implemented and the issue has been remediated, however, you need to look at the particular issue. That remediated an issue does not mean it may not have created other issues before now. So depending on the type of issue, if it's an issue that hasn't crystallized into other issues that has caused other problems, then you should actually be able to make a case as to why should you be penalized. Lessons have been learned. I'm going to go forward to be of good behavior. But if, it's like saying somebody did something and said, I'm sorry. That you said you are sorry doesn't mean the consequences are going to be taken away for some type of issues. Mm-hmm. If you have a 15-year-old in secondary school and go pregnant, I'm sorry, yes, you are sorry, but the consequence is there. Do you understand? So it depends on the particular kind of issue. But if it's just an issue that's been remediated, there's no additional thing to it, then I would imagine that the remediation should suffice. And for the company to have remediated, obviously they've realized, because some things you can make mistakes genuinely. Everybody makes mistakes. Mm-hmm. We are all not angels.
Okay,
I'm sure the regulators will now say, because I want to say that there are consequences.
The fact that my sister has made a comment, I think I need to add something to that. As regulators, we are not unmindful of the situations that companies and institutions are. Now, let me just give you an example. We had a lot of penalties for non-submission of regulatory returns reports to the Commission. And the money spanned up to about 5 billion. But later we just ask, what could be the problem that people are not complying on time? And we engage the Nigerian Employees Consultative Association, Manufacturer Association of Nigeria, and many other associations and other trade groups. And we discuss. We say, okay, now the fact that the provision of law is that much as the penalty has been charged, it has become a revenue of the federal government, and nobody can give you a waiver apart from the Honorable Minister of Finance. Then we come in conjunction with our board and the executive management. We wrote a position paper to the Honorable Minister and told them that, look at the situations. And when you look at it, there are so many manufacturing industries that are today closed down. but that does not take away their submission, even if it is a new return to the commission. But because some of them are ignorant that, look, it's only if I'm operating that I can now liaise with my operators. But they have forgotten that as far as the law is concerned, being a registered organization, they are still a legal entity. And they have already shown that they are part and parcel of the regulated entities. So we have written to the Honorable Minister, and they reason with us to the extent that a waiver of 60% of all the penalties that has been applied to all of them were waived. So out of that 5 billion, we ended up looking for payment of about 1.4 billion. So as regulators, we are not unmindful of what is happening. And at the same time, we are trying to make sure that we encourage people to continue their businesses the way that they are supposed to operate. So I think my sister should look at it as regulators. We do not have a steel heart, but always we have a flexible heart, and we are always trying to see, because what we are after is that how can the business continue? Because not continuing, it means a lot. It means unemployment, it means lack of revenue, it means so many other factors that when making assessment, if we are looking for foreign direct investment, many people will make that kind of assessment. Why are their industries closing? And then what is creating the collapse of most of their industries? So these are the components that we are always looking at, and then we carry along most of the stakeholders so that we can come up with an informed decision to make sure that things are going the way that they are supposed to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Because of time, I'm just going to be able to take one last question. And I'd like Mr. Allison to answer that. SEC has been making persistent effort to save the investing public from Ponzi and fraudulent schemes. Yeah. What are you currently doing to regulate crowdfunding, most importantly in the areas of agri-tech funding in recent times?
Well, the Commission currently is working seriously to come up with the rules that will guide the operation of crowdfunding in Nigeria. And then we are making effort to make sure that we borrow so many other things from other jurisdictions. And before all this issue of regulations may come up, we are taking punitive measures to ensure that we are controlling the activities of Ponzi schemes, of which we are involving even the Economic and Financial Crime Commission to make sure that things are being put in order. But actually, the issue of regulations in terms of rulemaking have already reached a significant stage, of which any moment from now it will be exposed to the market to make sure that even if we are taking somebody to court or taking any punitive measures against them, at least we have something on ground to say that this is what we are going to. But because of currently we do not have a specific rule, but we only have the enforcement measures to curtail their activities. That's the only thing that we. But if you really wanted to take care of certain kind of problem like the issue of Ponzi scheme and other crowdfunding activities, then you have to regulate it and make it to become legal, so that eventually out of that illegality you can still make something out of it, because the number is so enormous for you to say that you just come out at once and you are just trying to kill it. But if you are able to come up with the rules and regulation, you can even allow the key players in that industry to make sure that they control the activities of their players, so that they know that only the legally registered ones can operate within that industry, and then certain things can come up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Because of time, we are unable to take any more questions. These questions will be taken and emailed to the speakers, and the responses will be sent to you via email. Thank you so very much, everyone, for participating. Mrs. Hilda Unko will now take over, but right before we have I discovered that there were some questions about data protection and cybersecurity today, and we have a webinar in 2 weeks. We'll communicate all the details to you regarding cybersecurity, IT governance, and data protection. Thank you very much. Mrs. Hilda Inko will now take over.
Thank you.
Thank you, speakers. And Aditayo, thank you. Well done. We'll just take last statements from our speakers. I'll start from Tomi. Tomi, last words, 1 minute.
I'll just make a quote from James Lam. Wiley Finance. He says that the only alternative to risk management is crisis management. And crisis management is much more expensive, time-consuming, and embarrassing. As organizations, we definitely need to ensure that we are complying with risk, because when we don't comply, then we will run into crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wenekai.
Thank you, Ida, for the
Last
opportunity
words. Please unmute your mic. Mr. Wenekai.
Yes, I can hear you. Okay. Thank you so much, Ida, for the opportunity to engage market participants today. All I would like to say at this time is that for us at the Stock Exchange, we are open to engagement with the market, and we are open to suggestions on how best we can regulate the market. And we are open to any idea that could help us to do our work better. And I want to also use this opportunity to say that we are not always after penalties, as some people may think, and I'm sure some market participants will bear us witness to that. Penalties are not actually a revenue head for us as an organization, but as a form of deterrence, and which is why we always engage people to ensure compliance. It is always a last resort for us at the exchange. And I can also confirm here that under this COVID-19 pandemic, the exchange has ensured that no matter what is happening, while we are ensuring regulation of the market, imposition of penalties is the last thing that we are doing. And I can say, since this pandemic started, the exchange has not imposed penalty on any listed company. We try to engage, encourage participants to comply, which is what we think adds value to the market rather than imposition of penalties. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Alassane.
Yeah. Well, ours as SEC, we are, as the name implied, we are regulators, and our responsibility is regulating and developing the Nigerian capital market. And whatever regulation that we came up with, people should look at it from the positive angle of it, not the negative aspect of it. But even though, for those who are always operating illegality, they will always fear the regulators. But for those who are always operating their legal businesses, we'll always be friends, and we'll always continue to allow our door open for them so that we can have a better discussion, including whoever that think that what we are doing is not right as an operator or whatever. But
thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, Ma. Thank you, Mrs. Adepoji. Thank you, Mr. Iwenekai. Thank you, Mr. Sulaiman. Thank you, Ms. Njemanze. Even though the network kept going off and on, we're so very appreciative of this opportunity. We hope that when we call on you again, you will answer us. Thank you, everyone, for participating today. We have a link that has been shared for feedback. Please just complete the form and send to us so that we can improve on our webinar sessions. Ms. Nko, anything else you'd like to add? Our network too has gone. Thank you so very much, sir. Have a lovely afternoon. All right,
thank
so
you.
bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, yeah.
Guys, can you hear me?
Yes.
I don't know what happened though towards the end. I could hear you guys, but you're obviously not hearing me. But it's okay. It's fine.
The network today was just...
The network has just been...
The network was terrible, and good luck has been off. So I had a little challenge with the tweeting, but I've posted everything to him. So once it comes up, we'll just post them directly.
Pauline, he was trying to reach you because he kept on calling me and telling me to reach you.
My network went off at some point too.